"You're nothing. Just a broke old woman," he laughed. Everyone joined in on his cruel joke at my expense. But the next morning in the boardroom, his face went pale when the CEO read my name. The company he was bragging about, I was the owner. I can still taste the bitter taste of that moment, the humiliation burning in my chest as everyone around me laughed. My own son's voice echoed in the elegant ballroom, reducing me to nothing more than an object of ridicule. That night, as I drove back to my modest suburban home, tears blurring my vision, I made a decision that would change everything. After 15 years of living in the shadows, it was time to show the truth. But let me go back to the beginning so you can understand how we got to this point. My name is Margaret, but everyone who knows me well calls me Maggie. At 62, I've been a widow for almost 15 years, ever since my husband, Richard, passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Richard and I met in college, two young idealists with big dreams. He was studying engineering, I was studying finance. We fell in love not just with each other, but with a shared vision of creating something meaningful together. And that's what we did. Bright Future Technologies literally started in our garage in 1989. Richard was the technological genius, the visionary who could see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. I was the strategist, the person who turned his brilliant ideas into viable business plans, who negotiated with investors, who built the necessary framework to make his dreams come true. In the early years, we worked side by side, endless days and nights, sacrificing almost everything to grow the company. Our only son, Thomas, was born 3 years after we started. I remember breastfeeding him while reviewing contracts, singing lullabies while analyzing financial spreadsheets. It wasn't easy balancing motherhood with the demands of a growing business, but Richard and I were a perfect team, taking turns supporting each other, finding our rhythm. As Bright Future grew, Richard naturally became the public face of the company. He had the charisma, the ability to inspire people with his words, to translate complex technical concepts into language anyone could understand and be enthusiastic about. I, on the other hand, felt more comfortable behind the scenes managing operations, finances, and long-term strategy. It wasn't a conscious decision to keep my role less visible. It simply evolved that way based on our complementary personalities and skills. Thomas grew up observing all this, of course. From an early age, he displayed traits both of mine and Richard's. He had his father's curiosity and enthusiasm along with my pragmatism and attention to detail. He was a brilliant boy, full of questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. Richard loved taking him to the office on weekends, showing him the labs, explaining the technologies we were developing. I sometimes worried that we were exposing him too much to the business world too early, but Richard insisted that it was important for him to understand what we did, the importance of hard work and commitment. When Thomas was 10, we had a conversation that would ultimately shape many future decisions. We were having dinner at home, just the three of us, something that became increasingly rare as the company grew and demanded more of our time. Thomas, who had just returned from a day at school, excitedly told me about a new classmate. "He's really cool, and his dad owns a luxury car dealership," he said, his eyes shining. "Today he came to school in a limo. Everyone wanted to be his friend, and he invited me over for the weekend because I'm the son of the owner of Bright Future, Richard," and I exchanged glances. It was the first time we'd noticed Thomas using his father's position to gain social status. After he went to bed, we had a long talk. "I'm worried, Maggie," Richard said. "I don't want him to grow up thinking he deserves things simply because of who we are or what we have. I want him to forge his own path, to know the value of hard work." I agreed wholeheartedly. We both came from middle-class families and knew the value of earning things through our own merits. We decided that night that while we wouldn't hide the company's success, we wouldn't flaunt it at home either. We would maintain a comfortable but relatively modest lifestyle. Most importantly, we would constantly emphasize to Thomas that a person's true worth lies not in their material possessions or social status, but in their character, in how they treat others, especially those who can do nothing for them. Over the next few years, we watched Thomas grow and develop. He was a dedicated student involved in sports and extracurricular activities. He had friends, occasional girlfriends, and the normal ups and downs of adolescence. We sometimes noticed flashes of arrogance moments when he seemed a little smug about his family status, but nothing out of the ordinary for a teenager. And we always talked to him about it, reminding him of the values we held dear. When Thomas went to college, choosing business administration as his field of study, Richard and I had another crucial conversation. "He'll come work at the company eventually," Richard said. "It's natural, and honestly, I think he has the talent for it. But we need to make sure he's doing it for the right reasons, and that he truly understands the responsibility that comes with this position." That's when we began formulating a plan. Thomas would enter the company the normal ways, submitting a resume, going through interviews, starting in an entry-level position. There would be no favoritism, no shortcuts based on his last name. And most importantly, we decided he wouldn't immediately know the full extent of his eventual inheritance. Yes, he knew the company was successful, that he would one day inherit a share of it. But we deliberately kept details about the actual value of the shares and the exact ownership structure vague. Richard was particularly adamant about this. "Maggie, he needs to build his own identity first," he said. "He needs to figure out who he is and what he can accomplish on his own before he knows he'll have it all in his hands one day." I agreed, though sometimes I worried whether we were doing the right thing by not being completely transparent. Thomas graduated with honors and, following our plan, sent his resume to Bright Future, among other companies. He was interviewed by managers who didn't know he was the founder's son. We'd been meticulous about keeping that confidential. He was hired on his own merits as a junior analyst in the business development department. I remember his pride when he told us the news, how his eyes shone with accomplishment. Richard was beaming. "See, he did it on his own. That will build his character." It was about a year later that tragedy struck. Richard was in the office late one night working on a new project he was particularly passionate about. He complained of chest pain, but attributed it to stress and indigestion. By the time he finally agreed to seek medical help, it was too late. A massive heart attack took him from us within hours. He was only 52 years old. The world collapsed around me. Richard wasn't just my husband, my life partner. He was my partner in everything. Together, we had built not just a family, but an empire. How could I go on without him? The first few days after his death are a blur in my memory. The funeral, the condolences, the endless decisions that needed to be made, it all seemed to be happening to someone else. As if I were observing my own life from the outside. Thomas, then 22, was my rock during that dark time. Too young to carry such a burden, he still remained strong, making arrangements, talking to lawyers, being the family man his father had taught him to be. I remember us sitting together in the living room late one night. A week after the funeral, both of us emotionally and physically exhausted. "Mom," he said gently, "we need to talk about the future, about the company, about finances, about everything." It was at this point that I had to make a crucial decision. The original plan Richard and I had formulated assumed we would both be present to gradually mentor Thomas, to observe his development within the company, to determine the right moment to reveal the full extent of his inheritance to him. Now, faced with his sudden absence, I faced a dilemma: stick with the original plan or change it completely. After much deliberation and conversations with Jason Miller, the company's CEO and a close friend of Richard's, I decided to stick to the original plan with a few modifications. Officially, Richard's shares in the company would be transferred to me, making me the majority shareholder. However, this would be kept extremely confidential. To the outside world, including Thomas, Jason would remain CEO, ostensibly reporting to the board of directors, while in reality, he would be working directly with me. I explained to Thomas that his father had left us a house, the same one we already lived in, comfortable but not extravagant, and a trust fund to ensure my financial security. I told him that most of Richard's shares in the company were in a complicated trust, which he would eventually inherit, but that the details were complex and would be revealed over time. It wasn't a complete lie, just a partial truth, carefully calibrated, to allow him to continue his own path of development without the pressure or temptation that would come with knowing the vast fortune that would one day be his. Thomas accepted this explanation without much question, perhaps relieved not. to have to deal with further complexities during an already painful time. He returned to work at Bright Future, determined to honor his father's legacy through his own success at the company. I, meanwhile, began my double life. To the world, including my own son, I was simply Maggie Carter, a widow living a quiet and modest life. But in the early hours of the morning or late at night, I would transform into Margaret Carter, chairman and majority shareholder of Bright Future. Technologies making decisions. I would affect thousands of employees and shape the future of the company Richard and I had built together. It was during this period that I met Amanda Thomas's girlfriend, who would soon become his wife. From the start, there was something about her that made me uncomfortable, though I tried not to judge prematurely. She was beautiful, intelligent, articulate, tall, admirable qualities. But there was also a calculating coldness in her eyes, a way she assessed everything and everyone around her as if constantly calculating their value to her. When Thomas brought her home for dinner for the first time, I noticed how her eyes roamed every inch of the room, clearly cataloging, assessing, perhaps disappointed by the modesty of our home. "Mom, this is a wonderful wine," Thomas said during dinner, sipping this special bottle I'd saved for the occasion. "It's French, isn't it?" I nodded and saw Amanda's look of surprise. "I didn't expect you to be such a connoisseur of fine wines." "Mrs. Carter," she commented in a tone that bordered on condescending. I smiled politely. "Life teaches us many things along the way, Amanda. Sometimes people surprise us." Thomas and Amanda were married about a year later. It was an elaborate ceremony far beyond what I would have chosen, but Amanda insisted on every extravagant detail. They bought a house in an exclusive neighborhood larger than they needed with a loan I knew would stretch Thomas's salary to the limit. When I expressed gentle concern about his finances, he quickly dismissed it, saying he was on track for quick promotions, that Amanda had important social connections, that they were investing in their future. The birth of their first child, my grandson Ethan, was a moment of pure joy. I held that little bundle in my arms, feeling the same overwhelming love I had felt when I first held Thomas. For a brief moment, all the tensions, secrets, and complications disappeared, and we were just a family celebrating new life. 2 years later, Emily arrived, completing the family. I adored my grandchildren unconditionally and longed to be as full a part of their lives as possible. In the first few years after the children were born, things seemed to be going well. Thomas progressed within the company, earning promotions on his own merit and building a reputation as a talented and dedicated professional. I visited frequently, helped with the children when permitted, and tried to build a meaningful relationship with Amanda, though she maintained a certain emotional distance. In our confidential quarterly meetings with Jason and the board's inner circle, I received updates on Thomas's performance, feeling proud to hear about his successes and concerned when there was occasional mention of his somewhat aggressive management style. The change began gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. Thomas's calls became less frequent, his visits more hurried. When I did go to their house, I increasingly felt like an intruder rather than family. Amanda always had some social activity planned, some important commitment that cut my visit short. The children, initially so affectionate toward me, seemed to be subtly pushed aside, occupied with an endless series of extra classes, social events, and activities that conveniently coincided with my visiting hours. On a particular Sunday, about 7 years after Richard's death, I arrived at their house for the lunch we'd planned. The house was abuzz, Amanda directing a team of staff, setting tables, arranging flowers, and preparing food. "Oh, Maggie, you're here," she said when she saw me at the door, a slight frown crossing her perfect face. "I completely forgot to call you. We had to reschedule our lunch. We're hosting some important friends for a charity brunch. You understand, don't you?" I swallowed the lump that formed in my throat. "Of course," I replied politely. "I should have called before coming. Are the kids home? Could I at least see them quickly?" Amanda was already looking at her phone, evidently checking some urgent message. "Oh, they're getting ready. Ethan has a piano performance, and Emily is finishing a project for her guests to see. Maybe next week, I promise we'll set something up." I nodded and left, feeling diminished, disposable. In the car, I allowed a few tears to fall. It wasn't the first time this had happened, and a part of me knew it wouldn't be the last. At home, I sat in my favorite chair, staring at the photograph of Richard and me on our table. "What would you do, my love?" I asked silently. "Are we losing our son to something I can't even define?" It was that day that I received an unexpected call from Jason. "Maggie, we need to talk about Thomas," he said, his voice serious. "Something happened?" I asked immediately, concerned. "Not exactly," he replied, "but I'm starting to see patterns in his behavior that worry me. He's becoming different, more aggressive with the team, more focused on status and power than on real results or the company's well-being. And frankly, I've heard rumors about the way he talks about you." My heart sank. "What kind of rumors?" Jason hesitated. "It's unpleasant, Maggie. He's been belittling you in conversations with colleagues, referring to you as an old woman who doesn't understand the modern world, insinuating that you're a financial burden to him, speaking as if you were almost an embarrassment he had to endure." I closed my eyes, the sharp pain in my chest almost physical. "I understand," I finally replied. "Thank you for telling me, Jason. I need to think about how to handle this." Things continued to deteriorate over the next few years. Thomas was promoted to department director, and with each rung he climbed the corporate ladder, he seemed to drift further away from me and the values Richard and I had tried to instill in him. Amanda, meanwhile, flourished in her role as an executive's wife, joining exclusive clubs, organizing elaborate social events, and cultivating friendships with the wives of other executives and influential figures. Children were changing too. Ethan, now 9, and Emily, 7, were polite when they saw me, but distant, almost as if they were interacting with a stranger. I once overheard Emily ask Amanda why Grandma doesn't dress like the other grandmas at school parties. "Because Grandma doesn't have the same resources as the other grandmas, honey." Amanda replied, not realizing I could hear from the kitchen. "We have to be patient with her." It was during one of the rare occasions I was invited to their home, Ethan's 10th birthday, that I experienced one of the most painful humiliations. I had saved 4 months to buy him the latest video game console, carefully wrapped in colorful paper with a handwritten card. When I arrived at the party, I was directed to the back of the house where several tables had been set up with elaborate food and drink. The garden was decorated like a miniature amusement park with inflatable rides, a candy machine, and even a small carousel. Well-dressed parents chatted in small groups while children screamed and ran around the room. Amanda, impeccably dressed in an expensive sundress, circulated among the guests like a perfect hostess. Thomas stood by the barbecue grill with other parents, all in casual but clearly expensive clothes, discussing golf or investments, or any other topic men of his social standing discussed at such events. I approached timidly, feeling immediately out of place in my simple dress and comfortable shoes. "Oh, Mom, you're here," Thomas said, a shadow of something disappointment. Embarrassment crossing his face briefly before being replaced by a polite smile. "This is my colleague Steve and his wife Jennifer. And this is Michael, our neighbor, and his wife Catherine. Everyone, this is my mom, Maggie." There were polite smiles and handshakes, but I could feel the appraising glances, the barely concealed curiosity about this older, simply dressed woman who seemed out of place in this refined setting. Thomas quickly returned to his conversation, effectively excluding me from the circle. I looked for Ethan among the children playing, but he was busy with his friends, barely noticing my arrival. Amanda approached, her professional smile in place. "Maggie, I'm so glad you came. The presents are being placed on that table over there," she said, pointing to a long decorated table on the porch. I thanked her and headed over, placing my carefully wrapped gift among the huge boxes decorated with designer wrapping paper and elaborate ribbons. A woman who was organizing the gifts took mine and read the card. "This is from Grandma," she said to Amanda, who was nearby. Amanda hesitated for a moment, then replied quietly, but not so quietly that I couldn't hear. "Put it a little apart from the others. It's, not on the same level." The woman nodded understandingly, moving my gift to the corner of the table, almost hidden behind a flower arrangement. I felt my face burn with embarrassment. I wanted to grab my gift and flee this place where I was clearly not welcome. But for Ethan's sake, I stayed. I composed myself and found a quiet spot to sit, watching the celebration from afar. Occasionally, a friendly mother or kind father would try to strike up a conversation, but invariably, the conversation would die when they asked about my life and I had no stories of exotic travels or expensive home renovations to share. When it was finally time to open presents, Ethan sat in a throne-like chair surrounded by his friends and a towering pile of gifts. Thomas filmed with an expensive camera, while Amanda narrated each gift opened effusively, thanking the parents, who had purchased particularly impressive items. My gift sat in the corner, almost forgotten. Finally, when almost all the other gifts had been opened, Amanda noticed mine still on the table. "Oh, there's one more," she said, her tone changing subtly. "This one's from your grandmother, Ethan." Ethan took the package, looking almost confused, as if surprised I'd brought something. He opened it, and for a brief moment his eyes lit up with genuine excitement. The game console, while not the latest limited edition model some of his friends already owned, was still a desirable gift. "Wow, a Game Station X!" he exclaimed, and for a moment I felt a surge of joy at having gotten something he really wanted. "Thanks, Grandma," he said politely. "It's nice." "Nice," Amanda repeated with a tight smile. "Very thoughtful of you, Maggie. Now, who wants cake?" Attention quickly shifted, and I watched as my gift was set aside as everyone headed to the head table where an elaborate rocket-shaped cake awaited. Later, as I helped clean up some used glasses in the kitchen, feeling I should at least make myself useful, I overheard Amanda talking to one of her friends. "It's so hard, she said quietly. "Thomas's mom tries, but she really doesn't understand our lifestyle. She bought Ethan that basic console when he already has the special limited edition Thomas gave him last month. I don't even know what we'll do with it. We'll probably donate it to some charity." Her friend made a sympathetic sound of understanding. "It must be complicated." "Does she have any financial problems?" she asked discreetly. Amanda sighed theatrically. "Thomas gives her a generous allowance, but you know how old people are? She probably saves every penny living, like it's still 1980. I swallowed the lump in my throat and silently left the kitchen, not wanting to hear any more. I passed through the living room on my way to the door and stopped briefly to look at the photographs proudly displayed on the shelves. Pictures of Thomas, Amanda, and the children on exotic vacations, at social events, in perfect family moments. I searched but couldn't find a single photograph of myself, not even an old one with Richard. It was as if their family history began and ended with their perfect little nuclear unit. I left without saying goodbye, doubting anyone would notice my absence. At home, I sat silently in the kitchen, a cup of tea cooling in front of me. Amanda's words echoed in my mind. She really doesn't understand our way of life. What had happened to my son, to the kind, considerate boy Richard and I had raised? How had he become this man who allowed, perhaps even encouraged, such disrespect for his own mother? Over the next few weeks, I dove deeper into my secret job running Bright Future. Meetings with Jason became more frequent as we discussed strategies for the company's global expansion, new products, and potential acquisitions. It was a temporary respite, a place where I was still valued, where my opinions mattered, where I was respected for what I knew and what I could contribute. It was during one of these meetings that Jason brought up Thomas again. "He's pushing hard for a promotion to vice president," Jason informed me. "His numbers are good, I can't deny that, but there are problems with his leadership style. We've received several complaints from team members who feel intimidated by him, some even asking for transfers to other departments." I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the weight of disappointment. "And what do you think we should do?" I asked, already knowing we faced a difficult decision. Jason hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Technically, he's qualified for the position. But honestly, Maggie, I don't think he's ready for the kind of leadership we need at our executive level. He's brilliant in many ways, but he lacks the emotional maturity, the empathy, and the long-term vision we seek in our senior leaders." I nodded slowly, an idea beginning to form in my mind. "Maybe it's time for a different approach," I suggested. "What if I came to work for the company more directly, not as an owner yet, but as a consultant? Someone to assess the corporate culture, the leadership development, This would give me the opportunity to observe Thomas in his professional environment, perhaps better understand who he was becoming. Jason considered the idea. It could work, he agreed. You certainly have the qualifications, and no one would question my decision to bring in an outside consultant. But Maggie, are you prepared for what you might discover? For how he might treat you without knowing who you really are? I smiled sadly. I'm already experiencing this, Jason. At least this way, maybe I can do something about it. We worked out the details over the next few weeks. I would be introduced to the company as Margaret Wilson, using my maiden name, a consultant specializing in organizational culture and leadership development. My official documents, resume, references, everything would be carefully prepared to ensure that no one, especially Thomas, could connect Margaret Wilson to Maggie Carter. My first week at Bright Future as a consultant was surreal. Walking the halls of the company I'd helped build, sitting in meetings about products. I'd helped conceptualize, talking to employees who had no idea who I really was. It was an out-of-body experience. I adopted a slightly different appearance, more polished haircut, elegant, but understated professional attire, a more formal posture than I normally assumed as Thomas's mother. It was surprising how small changes combined with the completely different context made the disguise effective. I spent the first few weeks simply observing, talking to employees at all levels, sitting in on meetings, absorbing the company culture. It was fascinating and painful at the same time. On the one hand, there was so much to be proud of. Bright Future had become a vibrant, innovative organization full of talented and dedicated people. On the other hand, I began to notice tensions, divisions, areas where the culture had deviated from the core values Richard and I had established at the outset. Finally, about 3 weeks after my arrival, I had my first face-to-face meeting with Thomas in his professional setting. Jason had arranged a departmental meeting where I would be present as an observer and Thomas would be presenting his quarterly results. I arrived early and sat discreetly in the back of the conference room, my notebook ready, watching as the executives filed in and settled in. Thomas arrived last, exuding confidence, effusively greeting senior executives while practically ignoring his subordinates. He didn't give me more than a cursory glance, just another consultant clearly not important enough to deserve his attention. His presentation was technically impeccable, I can't deny it. The numbers were solid, his analysis insightful, his recommendations strategically sound. But it was his way of interacting with people during the Q&A session that really caught my attention. When Jason or another senior executive asked a question, Thomas responded with deference and elaborate detail. His entire body turned toward them, his body language open and engaging. But when someone of a similar or lower level raised a point or asked a question, his tone would subtly change. He became curt, sometimes with a hint of condescension, his posture more closed off and impatient. In one particularly revealing moment, a young analyst asked a perceptive question about a potential flaw in their marketing strategy. Before she could fully finish her question, Thomas interrupted her. "I don't think you fully grasp the sophistication of the model," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's a bit more complex than it seems at first glance. Perhaps we can discuss it offline later when I have time to explain the basics." The young woman blushed visibly and didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. I made a mental note to look her up later. Her question had been valid and intelligent. After the meeting, Jason made formal introductions in the hallway. "Thomas, I'd like you to meet Margaret Wilson, our new organizational development consultant. She'll be evaluating various aspects of the company over the next few months, including your department." Thomas shook my hand firmly, offering me his professional smile, the one he reserved for people he considered helpful to his career. "Nice to meet you, Miss Wilson," he said politely. "I hope you found my presentation informative." "A very thorough presentation, Mr. Carter," I replied with professional neutrality. "Your results are impressive. It seems you have a talented team working with you." There was an almost imperceptible frown, as if he didn't appreciate the mention of his team, as if he'd prefer all the credit go directly to him. "Yes, they are adequate," he replied vaguely, his eyes already searching for more senior executives in the hallway. If you'll excuse me, I need to speak with Mr. Miller about a few points of my presentation. It was a pleasure, Ms. Wilson. Over the next few weeks, I had several opportunities to observe Thomas in his professional environment. We scheduled one-on-one meetings where I asked questions about his leadership approach, his vision for the department, and his methods for developing his team. His answers were always polite and technically sound, but they often revealed a perspective focused primarily on his own advancement and recognition rather than the greater good of the company or the development of his subordinates. In one of these meetings, I asked him directly about his leadership philosophy. How do you define success as a leader, Mr. Carter? He leaned back in his chair, clearly confident in his answer. Success is meeting and exceeding goals, Ms. Wilson. Numbers don't lie. When my department consistently exceeds financial expectations, that's undeniable success. What about developing the people on your team? I gently pressed. How do you measure success in that regard? He made a vague gesture with his hand. People development is important, of course. But at the end of the day, we're here to generate shareholder value. If people want to grow, they need to prove their worth through tangible results. I'm not here to hold hands. I'm here to lead a high-performance department. I nodded, taking notes while internally wondering how my son had become so focused on short-term results, so disconnected from the human impact of his decisions. The opposite of cute, opposite of everything Richard had championed and modeled. After several weeks of observation, I presented a preliminary report to Jason, detailing my findings about the company's organizational culture with a particular focus on Thomas's department. The report was fair but straightforward, highlighting both the strengths and problem areas I had identified. Jason read it carefully, nodding occasionally as he flipped through the pages. "This confirms much of what I've been noticing, Maggie," he said when he finished. "The question is, what do we do about it? I spoke to Thomas as you suggested, raising concerns about his leadership style, but he essentially dismissed the feedback, insisting that his results speak for themselves." I sighed, feeling torn between my roles as executive and mother. "We need to follow the normal process, Jason," I finally replied. "No special treatment, positive or negative. If he was ready for the promotion based on merit and behavior, he would get it. If he wasn't ready, he wouldn't get it. The fact that he was my son shouldn't enter into the equation." Jason nodded, respecting my decision, though I could see he was concerned about how I was handling the situation emotionally. Meanwhile, I continued my life as Maggie, the mother and grandmother. Visits to Thomas's house became even more rare and tense. On one particularly revealing occasion, about 2 months after I began my role as a consultant, I was invited to Sunday dinner. When I arrived, Thomas was visibly agitated. "Mom, you're late," he complained. Dinner was scheduled for 6, and it was already 6:20. "Sorry, dear," I replied, surprised by her irritation at such a short delay. Traffic was bad, and I stopped to buy flowers for Amanda. I handed her the bouquet I'd brought, which Amanda accepted with a polite but unenthusiastic smile. "They're beautiful, Maggie," she said automatically, setting them aside without even looking for a vase. Thomas continued, his irritation still evident. "Well, we're on a tight schedule tonight. We have a fundraiser at 8, very important for Amanda's connections. We'll have to hurry dinner." During the rushed meal, I tried to engage the children in conversation, asking about school, their hobbies, their lives. Ethan, now 10, responded in monosyllables, clearly more interested in the tablet he kept next to his plate despite Amanda's occasional disapproving glances, not because of the device's presence at the table, I realized, but because he wasn't paying enough attention to his own conversation. 8-year-old Emily was a bit more communicative, telling me about her ballet lessons and the upcoming recital. "Grandma, will you come see me dance?" she asked hopefully. Before I could answer, Amanda interjected gently. "Honey, the recital is a very exclusive event. We were lucky to get tickets for the parents and a few close family friends. I'm sure Grandma understands that space is limited. Maybe next time." Emily's face fell for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure, having apparently learned young to hide disappointment. The conversation over dinner revolved mostly around Thomas's professional successes and Amanda's social events. At one point, Thomas casually mentioned a ski trip they were planning for the winter. Aspen is simply gorgeous this time of year, Amanda commented enthusiastically. We bought a timeshare in the most exclusive condominium on the mountain. They only accept a very limited number of families, all carefully selected. Thomas smiled proudly. It's an incredible networking opportunity. Half of Bright Future's executive board owns properties there, as do CEOs of several other major companies. It's truly an investment in my future. I nodded politely, feeling once again the disconnect between the world they had created for themselves and the values Richard and I had tried to instill. Toward the end of the meal, I decided to bring up a topic I had been avoiding. Thomas, you mentioned that next week is the 15th anniversary of your father's passing, I said gently. I was thinking maybe we could visit the cemetery together, leave flowers, ... Thomas glanced at his expensive watch, looking uncomfortable. Oh, Mom, I appreciate the sentiment, but my schedule is incredibly full next week. We have the quarter end closing, several crucial meetings. And honestly, I've never really understood this tradition of visiting cemeteries. Dad isn't really there, he's in our memories. We can honor him by being successful, living well. Isn't that what he'd want? I think he'd be more impressed with the results I'm achieving at the company than with a few flowers on his grave. I felt a pang of pain so sharp I almost let out an audible sound. The casual way he dismissed not only my request, but the very idea of a moment of contemplation and respect for his father struck me deeply. Before I could respond, Amanda intervened, glancing at her own designer watch. Thomas, we need to hurry if we want to have time to change before the event. Maggie, it was lovely seeing you, but we really need to get ready. Now, I was effectively dismissed, practically pushed out the door with quick hugs and empty promises to do this again soon. As I drove home, the tears I'd held back all night finally flowed freely. What had happened to the loving boy Richard and I had raised? How had he become this cold, calculating man, so focused on status and material success that he couldn't even set aside a moment to honor his father's memory? The next day at the office, I passed Thomas in the hallway. He was chatting animatedly with two senior executives, clearly trying to impress them. When he saw me, he offered only a distracted wave and a brief Mrs. Wilson before turning his full attention to the men he considered most important to his career. The dissonance between the man he saw in the office and the son he had raised was nearly impossible to reconcile. That afternoon, I had a long conversation with Jason in his office, doors firmly closed. I think the time has come, Jason, I finally said. We need to make a decision about Thomas's promotion, and I also think it's time to consider revealing the truth. He looked surprised. Are you sure, Maggie, after all this time keeping it a secret? He nodded slowly. Richard and I created this plan to help Thomas develop as a person, to ensure he forged his own path. But now I see that without the proper guidance, without the framework of values we tried to instill in him, he strayed in a direction neither Richard nor I would have desired. The promotion decision was made based on merit and behavior, as we had established. Thomas would not receive the vice president position he so desperately desired. Instead, the position would go to a highly respected manager from, quote, if we're a, quote, questionable ingredients, if you're using like a scanner, a lead sict of a scanner app, and it's like, we're gonna die. Like, look at this tech stuff. If we're going to die. Look at this. And we all know. I've been exploring that we know. The position would go to a highly respected manager. When I see, to comfort it, completed Manus, another department, someone known for her integrity, empathy, and ability to build strong teams. As for the revelation of the truth, we decided it would happen during the company's annual gala event scheduled for later that week. It would be a public official announcement impossible to ignore or downplay. The night before the gala, I called Thomas. He answered hurriedly with sounds of activity in the background. Hi, Mom, I'm really busy right now. Can we talk some other time, son? I just wanted to see how you are, I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. I heard tomorrow's the big company gala. Yes, he said, his voice immediately taking on a more animated tone. It's a very important event. For senior executives and special guests only. In fact, there are strong rumors that my promotion to VP will be announced tomorrow night. I felt a pang of sadness knowing he would be disappointed, but also a renewed determination that it was time for real change. That sounds wonderful, Thomas, I replied sincerely. I'm proud of you, no matter what. He made an impatient sound. Thanks, Mom. Look, I have to go. Amanda's calling me. We have to pick out our outfits for tomorrow. It's a very important night for us. We'll talk later, okay? And the call ended before I could say anything else. On the night of the gala, I prepared carefully. I chose an elegant deep blue dress, a discreet but precious pearl necklace. Richard had given me for our last wedding anniversary and styled my hair in a sophisticated style. The woman staring back at me in the mirror wasn't the Maggie Thomas knew, but Margaret Carter, co-founder of Bright Future Technologies. A respected businesswoman, albeit secretly. I took a deep breath, preparing myself emotionally for the night that would change everything. I arrived at the event deliberately late when most of the guests had already arrived. The five-star hotel's ballroom was stunning, decorated in Bright Futures. CORPORATE colors and filled with executives in formal wear. I spotted Jason immediately and addressed him. Margaret, I'm so glad you're here, he said, with a smile only I could recognize as strained. Are you ready? As ready as I can be, I replied, accepting the glass of champagne he offered me. I quickly spotted Thomas and Amanda in the crowd. They were in the center of a small group, Thomas gesturing animatedly as he spoke. Amanda radiant in an expensive red dress, her hand occasionally touching his arm in a possessive gesture. They looked the picture of corporate American success, exactly how they'd always wanted to be seen. I quietly moved around the room, chatting briefly with executives I'd met over the past few months in my consulting role. Eventually, as I knew I would, I found myself in the same group as Thomas and Amanda. Jason approached at that moment and made the formal introductions. Thomas, Amanda, have you met our consultant, Margaret Wilson? Amanda extended her hand with her perfect social smile. It's a pleasure, Mrs. Wilson. Thomas has been mentioning your work with the firm recently. Thomas looked slightly uncomfortable, probably remembering the negative comments he'd made about me to colleagues. Yes, we've crossed paths a few times, he said formally. Ms. Wilson has an interesting perspective on our operations. I sensed the slight contempt in his voice, that condescension he couldn't quite hide even in a professional setting. You have a beautiful family, I commented, looking at a photo on Amanda's phone showing the children. Thomas seemed surprised by my knowledge. Yes, Amanda replied proudly. Our children, Ethan and Emily. Thomas turned to Steve, a close colleague. Steve, you know my children right there. Simply brilliant. Emily is already learning Mandarin and Ethan is a math prodigy. We're planning to send them to specialized camps this summer, and then we have our trip to Europe, of course. Amanda has secured reservations at the best hotels. Steve nodded, visibly impressed. It sounds wonderful. You're lucky to be able to provide these experiences for your family. Thomas visibly swelled at the compliment. Well, hard work pays off, doesn't it? The company knows value when it sees it. In fact, Amanda and I are considering buying a second home, perhaps in Aspen or the Hamptons. I watched silently as the conversation continued in this vein. Thomas and Amanda, subtly and sometimes not so subtly flaunting their lifestyle and aspirations. Never once did they mention their mother or any family beyond their perfect children. It was as if I, Maggie, simply didn't exist in their idealized world. Dinner was served and I was seated at a different table from Thomas and Amanda, which was a momentary relief from the tension I was feeling. I ate only a little, my stomach tightening with anticipation. Finally, after dessert, Jason took the stage to begin the awards ceremony and announcements. He began with the usual honors, recognizing employees for their long service, presenting awards to high-performing teams, and announcing minor promotions. Thomas sat bolt upright in his chair, his eyes fixed on Jason, clearly expecting to hear his name at any moment. Finally, Jason got to the part everyone was waiting for. Now, he said into the microphone, I have some important announcements regarding our senior leadership. Many of you know that we are planning a significant reorganization to prepare Bright Future Technologies for its next chapter of growth. I saw Thomas straighten, his posture even further, a confident smile beginning to form on his lips. But before we get to that, Jason continued, it is with great pleasure that I welcome to the stage someone very special. Someone who has been instrumental in the success of this company from the beginning, though few know it. Please welcome the true force behind Bright Future Technologies, our majority owner and chairman, Mrs. Margaret Carter. A stunned silence fell over the room, followed by confused applause as I rose from my seat and walked toward the stage. I looked directly at Thomas, whose expression had frozen in complete disbelief. His face visibly paled as realization began to dawn on him. Beside him, Amanda looked, equally shocked, her eyes wide and mouth slightly open in an expression that under other circumstances would have been comical. As I arrived on stage and accepted the microphone from Jason, I looked out at the audience of executives and employees. Many looked confused, others surprised, some clearly trying to process what they had just heard. Good evening, everyone, I began in a clear and firm voice. For those of you who have known me over the past few months as Margaret Wilson Consultant, I apologize for the slight dissimulation. My full name is Margaret Wilson Carter. Along with my late husband, Richard Carter, I founded this company over 30 years ago. I paused, letting the information sink in. I saw the eyes of some of the company's senior staff widen in recognition. After Richard's passing, I chose to remain behind the scenes, allowing our excellent leadership team under the direction of CEO Jason Miller to take over day-to-day operations. However, I have always maintained my position as majority shareholder and chairman of the board. Recently, I decided it was time to take a more active role in the company I helped build. My eyes met Thomas's again. He looked absolutely stunned, as if he'd been physically struck. Amanda whispered furiously in his ear, her expression alternating between shock and rapid calculation. Over the next few months, I continued, we will be implementing several changes to ensure that Bright Future Technologies not only maintains its market leadership position, but also preserves the core values on which it was founded: innovation, integrity, and mutual respect. These values are non-negotiable and represent the legacy my husband and I have always wanted for this company. Jason took the microphone again to announce the planned organizational changes, none of which included Thomas's promotion to vice president. Instead, a talented woman from another department known for her work ethic and leadership skills was announced for the position. As the announcements continued, I watched Thomas abruptly rise from his chair and walk toward the bar at the back of the room. After a few minutes, I decided to follow him. I found him holding a glass of whiskey, his knuckles white from the tightness of his grip. He looked at me as I approached, his eyes a mixture of confusion, anger, and betrayal. Why was all he could say, his voice strangled. I ordered a glass of water from the bartender and positioned myself beside him. Not here, Thomas, I replied calmly. We can talk privately after the event. He shook his head, disbelief still evident in every line of his face. All this time you were, and you never told me. You let me think you were just a broke old woman, I added softly. Yes, Thomas, that's what you thought. That's what you said, not just to me, but about me to other people. He had the decency to look embarrassed even amid his confusion. His anger seemed to rise, perhaps as a defense mechanism. You lied to me for years, he accused in a fierce whisper. How could you deceive me like that? Did Father know about this? Was this some kind of sick test? I took a deep breath, maintaining my composure. Your father and I made this decision together before he passed away, I explained. We wanted you to find your own path, to build your career on your own merit, not because of your last name. You joined the company through the normal process without favoritism. That's something you can be proud of. He laughed bitterly. Proud, meanwhile, you were watching me, evaluating me, judging me, ... Without even giving me the chance to know the truth, Amanda approached at that moment, her demeanor completely transformed. Maggie, she began with a sweetness she'd never directed at me before. This is simply incredible. What a wonderful surprise. You must be so proud of everything you've built. I ignored her transparent falsehood and kept my eyes on Thomas. "We can continue this conversation tomorrow in my office," I said firmly. "Now we have guests and a celebration to attend to." Thomas opened his mouth as if to protest, but Amanda placed a hand on his arm. "Of course, Maggie," she said, still trying to adjust to the new reality. "Tomorrow will be perfect." The rest of the evening was a blur of conversation, congratulations, and many questions from employees curious about my history with the company. I kept my answers brief and professional, promising more detailed communication in the following days. Thomas and Amanda left early, he visibly shaken, she trying to keep up appearances with a forced smile. The next morning, I sat in what was now officially my office at Bright Future headquarters, waiting for Thomas. Jason had updated me that Thomas had called early, confirming the meeting. He arrived promptly at 1000 a.m., looking like he'd had little sleep. His eyes were darkened by dark circles, and his usually confident posture looked defeated. "Sit down, son," he said gently, indicating the chair across from me. He obeyed mechanically, still looking at me as if I were a stranger. Why, he asked again the same question from the night before, but this time with less anger and more genuine confusion. I sighed, clasping my hands on the table. "When your father was dying, he explained that he wanted you to grow up without the weight of the family name and fortune. He feared it would hinder your development as a person, that you would become dependent rather than independent. I agreed with him then, and I continued to respect that wish after his death." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "So all this time, while I worked endless hours, trying to climb the ladder, while Amanda and I strove to build our social standing, while we carefully budgeted every penny to provide the best education for Ethan and Emily, you were sitting on a fortune, not just a fortune, but control of the very company I work for." "Yes," I replied simply. "But Thomas, I have to ask, all those things you mentioned, social status, lifestyle, do they make you happy, really happy?" He seemed surprised by the question, as if he'd never considered happiness as a factor in his decisions. "Of course," he said automatically. "We have a wonderful life." I looked at him skeptically. "A life so wonderful, you couldn't include your own mother in it. So perfect, you were embarrassed to introduce me to your friends and colleagues, so fulfilling that you constantly needed to put others down to feel superior." He looked away, shame finally showing on his face. I wasn't T. It wasn't quite like that. You don't understand the pressure, the competition, ... So the treatment I received wasn't personal." I asked. "What about all those other people you treated with disrespect over the years? The subordinates you bullied, the colleagues you belittled?" Thomas was silent with no immediate answer. "Son," I continued more softly, "what saddened me most wasn't that you didn't know about the money or the company. It was seeing how success seemed to be changing who you are. The boy we raised, who was kind and considerate, who cared about others. Where had he gone?" Thomas swallowed, his eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "I just wanted to be successful," he murmured. "I wanted to make you proud of me. I've always been proud of you, Thomas. Of your hard work, of your intelligence. But I never needed you to be rich or powerful for that. I just needed you to be a good person." He ran his hand over his face, visibly moved. "What now?" he finally asked. "What happens now?" "Well," I replied, "that depends partly on you. I won't remove you from the company if that's what you're afraid of. You've earned your position on your own merit, and your technical performance is excellent." He looked slightly relieved, but still cautious. "However," I continued, "there are aspects of your professional and personal behavior that need to change. Starting today, you will work directly with me on a special project. We will review the company's organizational culture with a particular focus on respect, inclusion, and the development of ethical leadership." His eyes widened at the irony of the situation. "You want me to learn about respect and ethics?" he asked, a slight defensive tone returning to his voice. "Exactly," I replied firmly. "Because if you ever want to assume a real leadership position in this company, you'll need to demonstrate those qualities. And if you want to rebuild our relationship as mother and son, you'll need them too." Thomas lowered his head, the reality of his actions finally seeming to hit him fully. "As for Amanda and the kids," I added, "I hope we can find a path to a healthier, more genuine family relationship." I'm not interested in buying your affection or pretending the last few years didn't happen. But I'm open to a fresh start if you are. Thomas nodded slowly, still processing everything. What about the trip to Europe? He asked, almost shyly. We're all going, I replied. You, Amanda, the kids, and I. It will be a good opportunity for us to reconnect as a family away from the pressures of work and social life. He seemed surprised by the suggestion, but didn't protest. The following weeks were a period of adjustment for all of us. News of my true identity as the owner of Bright Future Technologies spread quickly, generating a wave of speculation and interest both inside and outside the company. For employees, I organized a series of informal meetings where I shared more about the company's history and answered questions. Many expressed admiration for what they called my courageous decision to remain behind the scenes for so many years, although to me it never seemed like a matter of courage, only of practicality. Thomas faced his own challenges as his colleagues and subordinates digested the news that he was the son of the company's owner. Some automatically assumed his success was due to favoritism, failing to realize that he himself was unaware of the connection. Others, especially those who had suffered from his behavior in the past, seemed pleased with this ironic turn of events. But to his credit, Thomas began to face the situation with a new humility he had never displayed before. Our joint project on organizational culture progressed slowly at first. Thomas initially seemed uncomfortable working directly with me, still processing the layers of revelation and adjusting to the new dynamic between us. But gradually, as we spent more time together, something of the mother-son relationship we had lost began to reemerge, albeit transformed by the experience we had shared. On a particularly meaningful afternoon, about a month after the revelation, Thomas and I had a heart-to-heart in my office. We were reviewing an organizational climate research project when suddenly he put his papers aside and looked directly at me. Mom, he said with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About how I've been acting, about the choices I've made, about the man I've become. And I think Dad would be disappointed in me. I felt a lump in my throat, surprised by his candor. He continued, his voice slightly shaky. I remember how he always emphasized the importance of treating people well, regardless of their position. How he said that true success wasn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by the positive impact you have on the lives of others. At some point, I forgot all that. I began to believe that success was about power, status, recognition, about having more than others, being better than others. And in the process, I lost sight of what really matters. I reached out and gently touched his hand. It's never too late to change direction, Thomas. Your father wouldn't be disappointed in you now. He'd be proud to see you having this realization, making the decision to do better, to be better. He shook his head, still not entirely convinced. How could you still love me after how I treated you, after the things I said, the way I shut you out of our lives? I smiled sadly. Because I'm your mother, Thomas. A mother's love isn't conditional. That doesn't mean your behavior didn't hurt me deeply. But I never stopped loving you or hoping the son we raised would find his way again. At home, the changes were equally significant. Amanda, pragmatic as ever, quickly adapted her behavior to the new reality. Suddenly, I was regularly invited to dinners and family events. Her condescending comments disappeared, replaced initially by an exaggerated courtesy that, while clearly calculated, was preferable to the previous hostility. But over time, to my surprise, something more genuine began to emerge. One afternoon, approximately 2 months after the revelation, Amanda showed up unexpectedly at my house. She brought a small plant as a gift, a gesture that felt oddly intimate and sincere for someone usually so calculating. Maggie, she began, clearly uncomfortable, but determined I came to apologize. My behavior over the past few years has been, well, frankly, it's been awful. There's no excuse for how I treated you, for the things I said, for how I ostracized you from the family. I invited her in, surprised by her initiative. We sat in the living room with tea, a very different setting from the elegant restaurants or exclusive clubs where we usually met. I think we were both surprised by the ease of the conversation that followed. Amanda revealed aspects of her personal history that I had never known. Growing up in a family with limited resources, being constantly reminded of her place, the fierce determination to never allow her own children to experience the same financial or social insecurity. "I'm not apologizing," she explained, just trying to help her understand. When I met Thomas, I saw in him not just a man I loved, but a path to the security and status I'd always craved. As the years passed, I became obsessed with the appearance of perfection, with climbing the social ladder, with ensuring that no one could ever look at me or my children with the same pity or contempt I experienced growing up. And in the process, I transformed into the kind of person I despised most. Her honesty touched me, and I realized there might be a chance for us to build something new and more authentic. "We won't be best friends overnight, Amanda," I replied with equal candor. "But we're family, united by our love for Thomas and the children. We can build from there." She nodded, a small smile appearing. "Maybe we could start by canceling that absurdly expensive trip to Aspen and doing something more meaningful as a family," she suggested, surprising me again. The children, Ethan and Emily, were the ones who adapted most easily. For them, the discovery that their grandmother was actually a successful and powerful businesswoman was simply thrilling. Suddenly, I was interesting to them, someone with stories to tell and experiences to share. Emily, in particular, began visiting me regularly, curious about my life and career. "Why did you keep everything a secret, Grandma?" she asked me one afternoon over hot chocolate in my kitchen. "It was never really a secret, honey," I explained. "It just wasn't something I advertised to the world." Sometimes the truest power lies in knowing who you are without having to prove it to others. Our trip to Europe, planned for July, became a symbol of a new beginning for our family. Away from prying eyes and social pressures, we had the opportunity to rediscover ourselves as a family. There were difficult moments, of course, overdue conversations that needed to happen, resentments that needed to be expressed and worked through. But there were also moments of genuine connection, of shared laughter, of new memories being created. One afternoon in Paris, Thomas and I found ourselves alone, walking along the Seine while Amanda took the children to see the Louvre. He was more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, the weight of constant ambition and competition seemingly lifted from his shoulders. "Mom," he said, suddenly stopping to look at the water, "I'm sorry for everything. For the way I treated you, for the things I said, for shutting you out of our lives. It was unforgivable." I touched his arm gently. "We're all on a journey, Thomas. We make mistakes, we learn, we grow. The important thing is to acknowledge when we're wrong and try to do better." He shook his head, still looking tormented. "But how could you stand it? How could you stand there and accept that treatment when all along you It wasn't about money or power, Thomas," I interrupted gently. "It never was. It was about values, about the kind of person you were becoming, the kind of example you were setting for your children." He nodded slowly, understanding finally dawning. "I guess I was so obsessed with proving my worth that I forgot what really matters. You and Dad were right not to tell me. If I'd known, I never would have learned that lesson." I smiled, seeing a glimpse of the sun I knew emerge again. "It's never too late to change course, Thomas. I believe you have a good heart." "I always have." We returned to the United States with a new understanding and a shared commitment to rebuilding our family on stronger foundations. At the office, Thomas surprised everyone with his transformation. The arrogant and intimidating executive was replaced by a more thoughtful and collaborative leader. He was still ambitious, still striving for excellence, but now he did so in a way that elevated others rather than diminished them. I watched with quiet pride as he led workshops on respectful communication, mentored younger employees, and implemented changes that made the workplace more inclusive for employees of all ages and backgrounds. One day, approximately 6 months after the disclosure, I received a report from a young employee who had previously been bullied by Thomas. "Mrs. Carter," she began hesitantly, "I know you're Mr. Thomas Carter's mother, and I wanted you to know." He apologized, not just to me, but to the entire team for his past behavior. And it wasn't just words, he truly changed the way he works with us. It's like he's a completely different person. As for me, I officially assumed my role as chairman of the board of Bright Future Technologies, working alongside Jason to prepare the company for its next chapter. I decided to keep my home modest, having discovered that I truly appreciated the simplicity I had initially adopted as a disguise. But I also began to more openly enjoy the fruits of my labor, traveling, supporting causes important to me, and most importantly, investing time and resources in my reunited family. Amanda and I continued to build our relationship, learning to know each other beyond the social masks and presumptions that had defined our interactions for so long. We are not and probably never will be best friends, but we have developed a mutual respect that allows for harmonious coexistence. Most importantly, she stopped encouraging the more superficial and materialistic aspects of Thomas's personality, perhaps realizing that true value lies not in appearances but in substance. On a recent Sunday afternoon, about a year after the revelation, I hosted Thomas and his family for lunch at my house, something that has become a regular tradition. As I watched Ethan and Emily playing in the garden, Thomas and Amanda chatting amiably with some neighbors I'd invited, I felt a deep gratitude for the journey we'd been on, painful as it was at times. "You'd be proud, Richard," I thought, imagining my late husband watching with approval. Our son had finally found his way. Last week, Thomas came to see me at the office with a surprising proposal. "Mom," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about how we can further improve the company culture. Remember that young analyst who asked the insightful question during my presentation months ago, the one I practically humiliated in front of everyone?" I nodded, remembering the incident vividly. "Well, she has brilliant ideas about how we can implement a reverse mentoring program, where senior executives are mentored by younger employees in certain areas. I'd like to lead that project if you'd approve. And also, I'm thinking about reducing my work hours so I can spend more time with the kids. I realize now how much of their lives I've been missing while chasing the next big deal or promotion." I felt a surge of pride and emotion. "That sounds wonderful, Thomas," I replied sincerely. "I think your father would be truly proud of the man you've become. Not because you finally understood the value of money or power, but because you finally understood that they have no real value unless they're used to create something meaningful to positively impact the lives around you. Perhaps the truest power isn't in controlling a company or a substantial bank account. Perhaps it's in the ability to remain true to oneself, to wait patiently while difficult lessons are learned, to forgive when necessary, and to believe in the possibility of redemption and growth. I've discovered that it's never too late to start over, to rebuild what was broken, to rediscover connections we thought lost. If you're listening to my story and you identified with it in any way, know that it's never too late to make changes, to establish healthy boundaries, to demand respect in your relationships. Sometimes the path is difficult and lonely, but the journey is worth it. Leave a like if this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this, and share in the comments. Have you ever experienced a situation where you needed to assert yourself to regain your dignity? Your experiences can inspire others facing similar challenges. Remember, your worth is not defined by what others think of you, but by who you know you are, regardless of appearances.